They erased me from every family photo. At the honor ceremony, I sat in the back row, no name, no seat, not even a decent glance. My brother was praised as the pride of the family. And me, I was the scar they tried to hide. But when I stood up, pulled out a letter written by a commander before he vanished, the room froze like a graveyard. My father's eyes, for the first time in 10 years, didn't look away. If you think this is just another family story, you're wrong. Subscribe now to witness stories that are raw, powerful, and unapologetically real. We're just getting started. Before they turned my name into a blank space in the family tree, I used to believe I was the daughter they were most proud of. This story begins at a ceremony they called a legacy celebration, but somehow forgot to invite the one who once risked her life to keep that legacy alive. The room smelled like roasted rosemary and polished ambition. Mira Lennox sat at the far end of the banquet table, back straight, eyes focused on the condensation slipping down her untouched glass. The clatter of forks and the soft clink of wine glasses filled the space around her like static. Conversation buzzed in the air, campaign talk, vacation plans, stories of promotions. In the center of it all, beneath a crystal chandelier, glowing with political vanity, stood her younger brother Mitchell, flanked by their father, and a carefully curated circle of local officials. Tonight was about him, a fundraiser disguised as a family gathering, a celebration painted in the language of legacy. To the next governor of the state, someone shouted, lifting their champagne with theatrical glee. Applause followed, loud, seamless, unthinking. Mira smiled faintly, not out of joy, not even irony. Just survival. Then came the moment. A woman from the next table, one of those forever aunts with a necklace too tight and opinions too loose, leaned slightly into the lull between courses and chirped. Didn't Mira used to be… what was it? A firefighter? The laughter was immediate, not cruel, not explosive, but enough. Like someone kicked over a glass and no one cared to mop it up. Yeah, a cousin added back when she thought fire could be tamed. Someone snorted. Even Mitchell chuckled without hesitation. The kind of chuckle that says she's not really one of us, is she? Mira lifted her water glass, brought it to her lips. She didn't drink, just held it there a second too long. Across the table, her father's eyes flicked toward her. A blink. No smile, no nod. He turned away, refilling his wine with the same deliberate grace he used to fold a flag. Her hands beneath the tablecloth, out of view, clenched once, then released. She had worn the dark green dress because it didn't draw attention. She had straightened her hair. She had arrived on time, smiled, nodded, blended, like she always did. She had thought naively, perhaps, that time had weathered the tension into something more polite. But in that moment, her name was a punchline, her past a blurry footnote, and her presence merely tolerated. She waited until the dessert plates began to arrive before excusing herself. No one asked where she was going, not even her father, certainly not Mitchell. Outside the hotel corridor was quiet humming, only with distant music and the murmur of staff. Mira walked past the front desk, through the revolving door, and into the parking lot. The air was cool spring with a bite, and the sky was already sinking into early dusk. She slid into the driver's seat of her car and didn't start the engine. Instead, she opened the glove compartment, pulled out the envelope. It was soft now, worn from being moved between drawers and bags and boxes over the years. She had almost burned it once, back when everything hurt too much to carry. But she hadn't. She had kept it untouched, unread, like a relic from a past no one wanted her to remember. Her thumb ran across the edge. She opened it slowly, carefully, like it might crack. Inside was the letter, handwritten on faded cream stationery. The seal of the State Emergency Fire Operations Unit still pressed in the corner, but it was the signature that mattered. Chief Commander Alton McRae, dead, or at least presumed dead, vanished in the Pine Valley fire 10 years ago. But before he disappeared, before the smoke swallowed everything and the radios went silent, he had written this. Mira, if you're reading this, I'm gone. You were the only one who didn't flinch. You refused the order. You held your line when everyone else played politics. You knew that retreat meant casualties and you stayed. The report will say otherwise. It already has. But you saved lives. Don't forget that. And don't let them bury it. Or you. Her fingers trembled. She hadn't forgotten. But she had let them bury it. The narrative had been rewritten so quickly, so efficiently, so cleanly. By the time the fires were out and the medals were handed out, Mira Lennox was already an afterthought, branded volatile, uncooperative, insubordinate. In reality, she had refused to lie. She hadn't backed a report that shifted blame onto a rookie who died inside the fire line. She hadn't protected the son of a state official who'd panicked, broken protocol, and abandoned his crew. She had spoken truth, and they had exiled her for it. Her hands closed around the letter. Firm now, no more trembling. She reached into the center console and pulled out a lighter. Brushed steel, military issue. She clicked it on. For a moment, the flame hovered beneath the edge of the letter. Then she turned it, burned the envelope instead. Let it fall in pieces into the cup holder, ash curling and dancing like ghosts. The letter went back into her coat pocket. She stared at the windshield. Light from the event hall spilled onto the sidewalk in golden ribbons, warm and soft and full of illusions. She could hear music again, laughter, the clink of glass. It all felt very far away. And then, just as naturally as breath, the question surfaced. If I don't stand up this time, when will I? She didn't say it aloud. She didn't need to. Her hand moved to the key, turned the ignition. The car hummed to life, headlights flaring against the pavement. She didn't drive away. Not yet. She just sat there, letting the engine purr, letting the moment settle. There had been many times in her life when Mira Lennox had waited for the right time. To speak, to defend, to return. But maybe the right time didn't exist. Maybe it was just now. Her fingers tapped against the wheel, again steady, silent. Not from nerves. Not anymore. From memory, the same rhythm she'd used to signal her squad through smoke, through heat, through hell. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, and for the first time in a very long time she saw herself. Whole, not forgotten, just waiting to be heard. The smoke had a taste. It wasn't just ash, it wasn't even fire. It was betrayal, burned rubber-singed canvas, something chemical that shouldn't have been in the air. Mira Lennox remembered that most of all. Not the sound of the crackling pines or the radio static or the distant roar of flame devouring the ridgeline. What lingered even now was the taste of it the moment she realized they'd been left behind. It was day 5 of the Pine Valley Inferno. Wind had shifted hard east, turning what was supposed to be a controlled suppression into a full-blown runaway. Temperatures spiked, visibility dropped, trees exploded, entire firebreak lines vanished in minutes. And somewhere in the chaos unit, Echo 7 Mira's team was ordered to fall back. But the order didn't make sense. She'd read the wind, felt it in her teeth. The flames were sweeping the opposite direction. They were holding perimeter. Until suddenly her earpiece buzzed with panic. Fall back. Fall back now. Full retreat. Her Lieutenant Griggs had looked at her like she'd lost her mind when she hesitated. Then came the second voice, one she knew. Thomas Halbridge, 22, barely through his second year on the team, son of State Commissioner Frank Halbridge, a green recruit, assigned not because of skill but pedigree. He shouldn't have been out there. He'd grabbed the mic breathless. "We can't fall back. Crew 3's still pinned behind Sector 9. Lennox, I've got eyes on 'em. If we retreat, we lose them." and then static, then silence, and then flames. Mira remembered her boots pounding the blackened soil, lungs screaming, eyes-watering, vision narrowing to tunnel. They pulled 3 bodies from the edge of the burn. Only 2 of them had pulses. Thomas wasn't one of them. By the time she returned to base camp, her throat raw and her knuckles bleeding from ash-hardened bark, the politics had already started. The first thing she noticed was who wasn't there: McCrae, the chief commander. The only man she trusted to keep the chain of command clean. Gone. No explanation, no message. The second thing was the expression on the face of Deputy Ops Director Marcus Reeve, a cold calm that had nothing to do with strategy. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask if she was okay. He just handed her a clipboard and said, "You'll need to submit your field report before 1800. She blinked. "Sir Thomas, we're aware," he interrupted. "There's been a lot of emotion," he continued. "A lot of noise. We need this incident to be clear, measured, contained." She took the clipboard, glanced down, read the words. She felt her stomach turn to stone. The report was already written. It claimed Thomas had disobeyed protocol, that he ignored her order, that he ventured into Sector 9 alone, that she, Mira Lennox, had issued the retreat but Thomas had broken rank, that she had done everything right, that he had died because of his own recklessness. The signature line was blank, waiting for hers. She looked up. Reeve didn't blink. "You're protecting the department," he said softly. "You're protecting your career. You're protecting a grieving father who funds half this division, and you're protecting the men and women who are still out there fighting this thing. They don't need a scandal. They need trust." Her hand tightened on the clipboard. "Trust," she repeated. "In what fiction?" His smile didn't move, just his voice. "Don't be naive, Lennox. Heroes die, but martyrs, they kill momentum." That night, Mira didn't sleep. She sat in the mess tent long after everyone else had drifted off the report in front of her untouched. She saw the faces of the crew Thomas had tried to save, remembered how she and Griggs had dragged them through smoke and glass and flame, remembered Thomas's voice, urgent, certain, terrified, and brave all at once. She picked up her pen, wrote her own version. The truth. When she submitted it the next morning, Reeve didn't even read past the first paragraph before saying, "You'll regret this." 2 days later, she was pulled from command. Official reason: pending review of conduct during high-pressure operation. Unofficially, she was radioactive, a liability, a potential whistleblower. Within a week, her badge was stripped, her locker emptied, her name erased from the commendation list. "Garrison's scapegoat," one of her old teammates whispered when he passed her in the hallway, eyes averted. The press called her a fireline breakdown. Commentators speculated whether she'd suffered some kind of stress-induced delusion. The commissioner released a statement thanking her for her brief but brave service, while announcing a memorial in his son's name. No one printed her version. No one asked. Not even her family. When she finally went home, burned out, physically wrecked, wearing the same smoke-stained jacket she'd fought in for 3 straight days, her mother met her on the porch and didn't let her cross the threshold. "Just let this go," her mother whispered. "Don't make things worse." Her father said nothing, just turned back to the TV. At the kitchen table, Mira placed her clearance badge beside her old childhood photo. No one looked at it, no one asked. The next day she left. Not just the house. Not just the city. She vanished from holidays, from birthdays, from weddings, from the group text. Her contact photo became the default gray silhouette. Her name was still saved in their phones, but no one called. Except once. A year later, a text. Still holding on to that story? It wasn't signed, but she knew who it was from. She never replied. Instead, she bought a fireproof lockbox. Put 3 things in it. Her field report. The note from McCrae written in frantic ink on the morning he went missing. And a letter she had written but never mailed. A letter addressed to Thomas's mother. It started with, "He was braver than all of us." That box stayed beneath her bed for years. Until the invitation arrived. A white envelope embossed with the seal of the state. "Honoring families who serve. featuring keynote speaker Mitchell Lennox. She almost tossed it into the trash. Almost. But instead she placed it on the kitchen table, beside the lighter, beside the letter. And for 3 days she sat. She walked to the mailbox every morning, sat on the porch every afternoon, stared at the envelope every night. Then one morning she picked it up, pressed the edges until they curled, and whispered, "They already buried me. They don't get to bury the truth too." She packed light, a change of clothes, the letter, the lockbox, and the courage she'd forgotten she still owned. She wasn't coming back to fight. Not exactly. She was coming back so that silence would no longer be the loudest voice in the room. She was coming back not to ask for a seat at the table, but to remind them she'd built half of it. And when she stood again finally after all those years of swallowing smoke and swallowing pride, Mira Lennox felt something in her spine uncoil. Not revenge, not even rage, just gravity, just return. The envelope was crisp. Too crisp. Mira Lennox found it wedged between a flyer for discount gutters and a political mailer with her brother's face beaming beneath the words, "Strong Roots, Stronger Leadership." The invitation had no frills, no personal note, just formal lettering on state-issued stock, as if the sentiment inside were factory-pressed like everything else Mitchell Lennox touched. She read it once on the porch steps, then again slower, letting each word crawl under her skin. The office of candidate Mitchell Lennox cordially invites you to a special ceremony honoring families who have contributed to the service and protection of this great state. It was signed not by Mitchell but by his executive assistant. An impersonal scrawl beneath a rubber-stamped signature line. The last sentence read like a formality dug out of a dusty file. "We would be honored by your presence." Not your service, not your sacrifice, just your presence. Mira stood there motionless, the paper vibrating slightly in her fingers from the morning breeze. She folded the invitation cleanly, evenly down the center. Not out of rage, but precision. Then she slid it into her back pocket and stepped inside. The house greeted her with silence. She didn't need time to decide. She'd known since the night she read McCrae's letter again, sitting in her car outside the fundraiser with the sound of her brother's voice echoing through the glass like a stranger's. This invitation, it wasn't a gesture. It was a trap door. A way to keep her under the rug, but close enough to claim if needed. She walked to the hallway closet, reached to the top shelf, and pulled down the fireproof folder she hadn't opened in years. Inside, everything was still there, the after-action report with her annotations, the first draft she'd refused to sign McCrae's final letter with the ink faded, but the truth unshakable. She removed only what mattered: 3 sheets of copied paper and 1 original envelope. No medals, no dress uniform, no nostalgia. She packed 1 overnight bag, civilian clothes, comfortable shoes, 1 black blazer that still carried the scent of mothballs and steel. At 5:17 a.m., she locked the door behind her. The highway out of town stretched like an artery across the state, gray and unremarkable. But as she passed mile marker 202, Mira's grip on the wheel tightened. She slowed, turned off onto a narrow service road that used to be dirt but now gleamed with new asphalt. The sign came into view like a slap. Pine Echo Nature Reserve. From fire comes renewal. It was almost funny. Almost. The forest that had burned for 6 days and taken 4 lives now had picnic benches and curated trails. A laminated plaque near the trailhead bore a photo of Commissioner Frank Halbridge smiling in front of a grove that never should have grown back. Beneath it, in memory of the brave men and women who served during the Pine Valley fire. No names, just that sterile phrase served. Mira parked the car near the edge of the lot. The ranger station looked new: solar panels, recycled siding, and honor box for maps. She didn't step out right away, just sat staring through the windshield, breathing in the absence of smoke. This place had no ghosts anymore. They'd scrubbed them clean. But she remembered the way the trees screamed. She remembered the boots melting, the radio going dead. The moment she and Thomas Halbridge locked eyes across a wall of flame and he nodded go, and she did. And then she went back for him. And when she returned, there was only silence. That silence was still louder than any apology her family had ever offered. She stepped out of the car, walked up the trail. She didn't go far. Just to the edge where the trees thinned and the sky opened into a clearing that used to be nothing but soot and bone. There was a family taking pictures on a wooden platform now. A boy with a foam firefighter's helmet was pretending to spray water from an invisible hose. Mira watched him for a beat, then turned away. As she approached her car again, a low whistle stopped her. A man in uniform leaned against a parked cruiser nearby, arms crossed, sunglasses dangling from his shirt collar. "Didn't expect to see you back here," he said, voice half surprised, half cautious. She blinked at him once, then narrowed her eyes. "Rick Torres!" He grinned. Older now. Wrinkles like battle scars. The mustache was new, but the voice hadn't changed. "Damn, Lennox. Still walk like you're carrying the weight of 10 men. She managed a smile. Not warm, not cold, just enough. "What are you doing out here?" she asked. "Transferred. Got tired of city noise? Figured I'd retire somewhere with fewer politicians and more deer." He looked her over. "You passing through?" "Something like that." He tilted his head toward the trail. "Place looks different, huh?" She didn't answer. Rick shoved his hands into his pockets. His tone shifted. "You know I still tell the rookies about you." She raised an eyebrow. He nodded. "Not the version they printed. The real one. The one where you didn't wait for orders. Where you went back in after the sirens stopped, after he bailed." She didn't flinch. Rick stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Between us, you should have been the one getting that damn medal, not him." There was no heat in his words, just gravity. Mira exhaled slowly. "I'm not here for medals." He tilted his head. "No." She met his gaze, fully voice even. "I'm here to get my name back." Rick studied her for a second longer, then nodded. "Good." They stood there a moment longer under a sky too blue for the history below it. When she got back in the car, the engine turned over without protest. She didn't look back at the grove. Didn't need to. It would always look different to her, but now it also looked small, like something she'd outlived. She pulled back onto the highway, the exit sign shrinking in the rearview mirror. In the seat beside her, the folder with McCrae's letter stayed unopened, but not hidden. For the first time in years, it wasn't a weight. It was ballast. And Mira Lennox drove on toward a ceremony that wasn't meant for her, carrying truth like it was a badge no one could strip. The parking lot was already full when Mira pulled in, but no one was waiting for her. She parked at the far end, away from the valet stand and the decorative lighting. She sat in the car for a long minute, engine off, hands still on the wheel. The invitation had said we would be honored by your presence, but Mira knew better. Her presence wasn't requested out of respect, it was damage control in a dress. Inside the hall, the sound swallowed her whole. Crystal glasses chimed in polite applause. Strings of carefully curated conversation drifted across the tables. No one looked at her. Not the greeter, not the volunteers with clipboards, not even the ushers she passed as she made her way around the edge of the room. She didn't belong here, and they all behaved accordingly. Mira moved like vapor, silent, unnoticed, until she found an empty seat in the last row of the ballroom. Her name wasn't on any place card. She didn't ask. She just sat, one hand resting on the folio in her lap, the same leather folder she had carried through disasters and hearings, the kind that held truths too sharp for display. She watched the front of the room, a stage framed with American flags, a massive screen glowing white with anticipation. And then the lights dimmed. The tribute video began with music strings triumphant and clean, and Mitchell's face filled the screen, standing on a fire truck, shaking hands with first responders. He posed with hard hats, smiled beside charity banners, lifted children onto his shoulders. Every image was scrubbed and cropped for public consumption. Then came the family montage. Birthday candles, graduation gowns, their parents on a fishing dock, Mitchell blowing out candles, Shelby hugging their mother. But not a single frame included Mira. She wasn't even a ghost in the background. It was as if she had never existed. The final image was a freeze frame of Mitchell kneeling beside a firefighter memorial statue, hand over heart. The words appeared in gold text across the screen, "Service begins at home." Applause erupted. Mira didn't clap. She didn't blink. She just let the wave of sound pass over her like smoke through a ventilator. A man in a headset and a too-tight suit scurried on stage, introduced himself as the event coordinator, and began the formal welcome. When he reached the family acknowledgments, he smiled into the mic and gestured toward the front row. Mitchell's wife Shelby, his wonderful parents, and of course his sister Mira Lennox, a retired school teacher. Mira's shoulders didn't move, but something inside her spine curled tight. Retired school teacher, they'd chosen something palatable, something quiet, something that wouldn't make donors shift in their seats. A rewrite neatly done. Her father sat up front, suit perfectly pressed, watching the stage with polite interest. Her mother smiled in that way she had mastered, present but hollow. Shelby crossed her legs like a pageant judge, glancing around with a satisfaction Mira recognized instantly, power through proximity. Not a single one of them turned around. Mitchell walked on stage to a standing ovation, shaking hands with veterans, winking at reporters. He reached the podium like he'd been rehearsing it for years. Maybe he had. "My family," he said, "is my compass, my strength." He paused just long enough for the applause to resume. "My wife Shelby, my parents, my sister." He didn't look at her, didn't gesture, didn't even nod in her direction, just let the word float there, unattached, vague, expendable. "My family is the foundation I stand on. Every moment I've spent in service to this state is rooted in the lessons they've taught me." Applause again, murmurs of approval, camera shutters. In the last row, Mira opened the folio. She unfolded the letter McCrae had written her 10 years ago, the one no one else knew existed. The page had yellowed slightly, but the ink was still clear, still defiant. His handwriting looked rushed, desperate, alive. She rested the letter flat across her knees, fingertips curled just beneath the edge. Her eyes stayed on Mitchell. His speech wound upward like a sermon. He was polished, likable, proud. He had mastered the art of appearing honest without ever being specific. She felt her pulse settle, not rage, not even hurt, just precision. She glanced at her parents. Her mother was beaming, eyes glassy with practiced emotion. Her father's hands were folded neatly, expression unreadable. And then there was Shelby, grinning for the camera's lips barely parting as she leaned toward Mitchell and whispered something. He laughed mid-sentence. The audience laughed with him, not knowing why. Mira didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She looked down at the letter. And back at the stage. She wasn't waiting for an apology. She wasn't hoping to be acknowledged. She was waiting for the exact moment when the weight of truth would shift. And when it did, she'd be ready. The applause was still fading when Mira stood. No spotlight turned her way. No introduction followed her footsteps. The stage hadn't been cleared for her, and the microphone hadn't been lowered to meet her voice. But none of that mattered. She didn't need permission. She didn't need music. She only needed the room to be quiet enough to hear her. And it was. The sound of her heels against the floor cut sharper than any announcement. One by one, heads began to turn, curiosity shifting into confusion, then unease. Mira walked with steady pace, unhurried, unbent. A woman not interrupting but continuing something long overdue. Mitchell froze mid-handshake with a donor. His smile flickered. Behind him, the MC stammered, trying to cover. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe that concludes our formal..." But Mira had already reached the steps. Shelby was the first to move, leaning toward Mitchell, whispering something clipped. Mitchell straightened, took a single step forward, half blocking the podium. Mira looked him in the eye. He opened his mouth, ready to object, but before a sound escaped, their father raised a hand from the front row. A small gesture, barely a motion, but unmistakable. Let her speak. Mitchell hesitated, then stepped aside. The room watched him yield, watched Mira step into the light he'd been standing in just moments before. She didn't look at anyone as she opened the leather folio. She removed the folded pages slowly, deliberately, like they deserved ceremony. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't clear her throat. When she began, it was with a calm that silenced the last scattered coughs and murmurs in the back rows. "My name," she said, "is Mira Lennox. I was a firefighter with Unit Echo 7 during the Pine Valley fire. 10 years ago, I made a decision that changed the course of that operation. And afterward, I was erased. No gasps, no interruptions, just breath being held." She unfolded the first page. "I have with me a statement, written by Chief Commander Alton McCrae on the morning he went missing. He left it in my care. I didn't release it earlier because I thought silence might be safer. For him, for me, for the people we were supposed to protect. But silence didn't save anyone." She began to read. Each word struck like an ember landing on dry grass. She read McCrae's account of the unauthorized retreat order, of how Thomas Halbridge had defied it to save a pinned crew, of how Mira had followed him not out of disobedience but necessity, of how the official report had been edited, names, redacted motives, twisted responsibility, deflected upward and outward, until no one could be blamed except the ones who weren't alive to protest. She reached the last line. "Lennox held the line. She saved that crew. The story you're hearing is not the one I leave behind. Protect her. Protect the truth. Chief Commander Alton McCrae." She let the words hang. The ballroom didn't stir. It didn't even breathe. She opened the second document, a photocopy of the original report she had refused to sign. She held it high enough for the first rows to see the black ink of her rejection scrawled across the bottom. Then she placed it on the podium, palms flat. "I didn't come here to accuse anyone. I didn't come to shame this family. But I won't let my silence be rewritten into complicity. You want to celebrate service, then start by facing the cost of it. Not just the names on walls, but the ones scratched out of memory." Someone sniffed. A chair creaked. And then a sound from the middle of the room, a man older in a faded jacket with a ribbon pinned unevenly above his pocket. His hand covered his mouth, but the tremor in his shoulders gave him away. He was crying. Mira saw him, and for a brief moment her voice faltered, not from fear but from recognition. She steadied herself. "I was told I should keep quiet, that my truth would complicate legacies, that my presence might damage a campaign." She looked out over the room, sweeping it like she had once swept a burning structure, searching for movement, for signs of collapse. "I don't need a medal," she said. "I don't need to be honored. I just need not to be buried." She stepped back. The silence that followed didn't feel like discomfort. It felt like acknowledgement. One by one, people turned to each other, not to whisper, but to process, to reckon. Some lowered their heads. Others stared at the stage as if seeing it for the first time. In the front row, her father didn't move, but his eyes were on her. And her brother, Mitchell Lennox, candidate Rising Star proud son, remained frozen in place. The corners of his mouth turned down slightly, and he bowed his head, resting it in his hands. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The room said it for him. Mira folded the letter once more. She didn't walk off stage in triumph. She didn't look for applause. She simply stepped down the same way she had come up, on her own terms, at her own pace, carrying only the weight that had always been hers to bear. The truth didn't need a microphone. It had finally been heard. The ballroom emptied like a draining wound, slow, unsteady, and uncomfortable. Polite handshakes replaced clapping. The music had stopped. The lights dimmed too much, then too little flickering, like they weren't sure what mood to honor anymore. Mira didn't linger near the stage. She walked down the aisle with the folio tucked under her arm, not looking left or right. She moved like someone who had just dropped a torch and was watching to see what would catch fire. She didn't get far before her father intercepted her. He stepped out from behind a velvet curtain near the side exit blocking the hallway. His suit jacket was still buttoned, but his posture had collapsed in on itself, held together by sheer muscle memory. He didn't speak right away, just looked at her the way someone might study smoke on the horizon, not with concern, but calculation. "You humiliated this family," he said at last. Mira met his gaze, unblinking. "No," she replied. "I told the truth." He stepped closer, voice sharp. "You stood in front of everyone and dragged us through the mud. For what? Some old report. A dead man's letter." She didn't flinch. That dead man saved lives, and I followed him when no one else would. His jaw tightened, but Mira didn't stop. "You're not angry because I spoke. You're angry because I didn't ask for permission first." He laughed bitter. "You've always been like this. Defiant, difficult. You never understood what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself." "I do," she said quietly. "I just refuse to serve a lie." The hallway went still. The sound of voices from the ballroom grew distant, muffled by the thick walls and thick shame. "You made us look weak," he hissed. "No," she said. "I made you look away." Before he could answer, a sharp click of heels echoed behind them. Shelby appeared perfect as ever, hair still pinned, lipstick untouched. But the calm polish had fractured. Her eyes were wild, her smile too tight. "Are you proud of yourself?" she snapped. Mira didn't bother answering. "You torched the whole night," Shelby went on. "You just couldn't let Mitchell have his moment, could you? You had to make it about you. Again." Mira reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped once, held it out. On the screen glowed a PDF, a scanned copy of the final McCrae letter, highlighted, time-stamped, and authenticated. "I didn't make anything up," she said. "I preserved what others tried to bury." Shelby didn't take the phone. She looked at it like it might burn her fingers. Mira's voice was even. "I didn't destroy anything, Shelby. I just opened a window. You don't blame the sunlight for showing you the dust." Shelby's mouth opened, then closed. She turned, muttering something under her breath, high heels stabbing the tile as she disappeared back toward the side hall. Mitchell was next. He didn't come storming in. He didn't come with cameras or fury. He came alone, tie loosened, eyes dark under the campaign lighting that had finally faded. He stopped a few feet from Mira. "Well," he said, almost casual, "I guess you won." Mira raised an eyebrow. "I didn't know this was a game." Mitchell's mouth twitched. "That's always been your problem. You don't understand the stakes. You never have." "No," she said. "I understood them too well. That's why I didn't play." He stared at her silence, hanging between them like a thread stretched too thin. "You think you've done something noble," he said. "But what you've done is irreversible. This won't just vanish after the weekend. My name, our family's name, it'll be dragged through every news cycle." She tilted her head, dragged by the truth. He looked away. "There are ways things are handled. Quiet ways, strategic ways. But you—" "I chose daylight," she said. "You chose shadows. That's the difference." He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just nodded once, small, almost imperceptible, and turned away. As he walked, Mira stood still, letting the weight of all three conversations settle in the marrow of her bones. Her breath felt heavy in her chest, but not from regret. From release. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Then again. She didn't check it. She didn't need to. They were calling now. The ones who never answered her before. Voicemail icons blinked. Emails piled in. News outlets. Advocacy groups. People she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone suddenly wanted her story, now that the truth had been said out loud in a room that wasn't supposed to hear it. But she didn't answer. She didn't run toward the attention. She turned down the hallway, walked past the exit door through the cool back corridor that smelled of cleaning fluid and cheap carpet. Her footsteps were quiet now, softer. She didn't slam the door on the way out. She just opened it and walked into the night. The room smelled like old fabric and leftover silence. Mira sat on the edge of the motel bed, the same cheap kind with scratchy linens and fluorescent lighting that never softened. The ceremony was hours behind her now, but the weight of it hadn't lifted. It hung in the air like smoke after a fire, thin, bitter, unavoidable. She'd taken off her blazer. The shirt beneath clung with the dampness of adrenaline that had nowhere else to go. The leather folio lay open beside her. The letter unfolded the words, breathing quietly in the dim light. She'd read it again, and again, and again. But this time wasn't for anyone else. This time was for her. She mouthed McCrae's words slower now, absorbing the cracks between the sentences. You held the line. You saved them. They'll erase that if you let them. But you didn't fold. Don't start now. Outside, a vending machine buzzed with the sound of stale cola being kept alive. The hallway light seeped in beneath the door, cutting across the carpet like a searchlight that never moved. Her phone buzzed once, then again. She ignored it at first. Then it buzzed a third time and she finally reached for it. The message came from an unknown number. It's Reyes. Echo 7. You probably don't remember me. I was a rookie back then, but I remember you. She blinked her thumb, hovering over the screen. What you said tonight, people like me needed to hear it. You were right not to stay quiet. You should tell the whole story. All of it. We need people to remember who held the fire back when no one else did. She set the phone down slowly, the words soaking into her chest like water hitting cracked earth. Her eyes drifted toward the corner of the room, where her duffel bag sat half-zipped, the same one she'd carried out of base camp the day they relieved her of duty. At the bottom, wrapped in an old shirt, was the hard drive. She hadn't opened it in years, not because she forgot what was on it, but because she remembered every second too clearly. She stood up, walked over, unzipped the bag, pulled out the drive like it was a scalpel. The laptop was ancient, but it still booted, coughing like an old engine coming out of retirement. The login screen pulsed faintly. She typed in the password with fingers that hadn't shaken since her last rappel from a burning rooftop. FIRELINETRUTH. The desktop flickered to life. Folder after folder populated across the screen, each one dated, labeled, sealed like wounds. She clicked open the one that mattered. Inside were still photos, grainy but raw. Her team crouched beside a smoking structure, a scorched ambulance, a man being dragged from a wreckage with her gloved hands gripping his collar. In one, you could almost hear the yelling. In another, the silence screamed louder. Then she opened the video files. She didn't fast forward. She let them play. The first was from her helmet cam footage from the night of the retreat order. The camera jostled as she ran through collapsing brush. Her voice barked commands clear and precise. There was Thomas calling coordinates. There was the moment she refused to pull back. The moment her decision bought time, saved lives, almost cost her everything. She sat perfectly still, watching her past without looking away. She let the chaos wash over her. The smoke, the fire, the panic, the clarity. And through it all, her voice steady as stone, giving orders that no one else had the courage to say. Her hands hovered over the keyboard. She could feel the crossroads again, just like she had felt in that tunnel of flame. Retreat or hold? She opened a browser. She typed the name of a journalist she hadn't seen in years. Leah Chan, former investigative reporter. Blacklisted after probing state fire department oversight. Threatened. Silenced. Vanished from headlines. But not forgotten. Mira had kept her card all these years. She copied Leah's encrypted contact from an old database. Opened an email draft. Attached 5 files. The original helmet cam footage, the unedited field report, McCrae's letter, A witness statement from Reyes saved as a voice memo, and one photo Mira with her unit arms wrapped over ash-covered shoulders, faces half-burned and fully human. In the subject line, she typed, "I am Major Mira Lennox. This is the truth." Her hands hovered over the keyboard still for one last second. And then she hit send. No flourish, no dramatic pause, just truth moving forward, finally freed from the weight of silence. The message disappeared into the dark pipeline of the internet, and Mira sat back. She exhaled. Not relief, not quite yet, but something close, something possible. In the reflection of the laptop screen, her face stared back. Not the erased sister, not the forgotten firefighter, not the scapegoat or the rumor. Just a woman who finally made the fire speak. The fire had long been extinguished, but now, 10 years later, it burned again, this time across headlines, comment sections, television screens. By morning, the story had spread. Lennox Lettershakes state election. Who buried the Fireline truth hero or scapegoat? The case of Mira Lennox. They didn't know what to call her: whistleblower, martyr, truth teller, traitor. And Mira didn't care what they chose. She wasn't looking for a name. She was taking back the one they had stolen. Within hours of the leaked files going public, the governor's press team canceled 3 major appearances. A formal investigation was reopened into the 2015 Wildcrest fire incident, now labeled under internal review for suppression of material evidence and deliberate falsification of operational records. In simpler terms, a cover-up. At the center of it all was the man with the silver pen and the spotless record, Commissioner Dwight Hensley. The same man who had walked across embers of public trust for 2 decades. Now the embers burned his feet. Photos surfaced, old memos, redacted emails. Suddenly, reporters wanted to know, why did Hensley's son survive when others didn't? Why did the investigation into Mira's decision-making end so quietly, so swiftly? Why had the only senior officer who backed her commander, McCrae, disappeared just weeks later under voluntary relocation? And then came the real spark. A video clip, grainy, a little shaky, but unmistakable. It was McCrae speaking at a firehouse gathering months before his disappearance. His voice calm, firm, exhausted. "There are 2 kinds of officers," he said. "The ones who count bodies and the ones who carry them out. Mira Lennox was the second kind. I didn't stand by her when I should have. That's on me. But no one should rewrite history with a polished pen and a dead man's silence." The internet erupted. In a matter of hours, thousands of comments poured in under the tag, #StandWithLennox. Some were from former firefighters, others from strangers who simply saw what courage looked like in a world too afraid to name it. Meanwhile, the Lennox family home in Prescott became a kind of quiet war zone. News vans lined the street. Neighbors whispered behind fences. Someone spray-painted the words, "Truth costs blood on the sidewalk." Mira's father didn't come out. He didn't speak, didn't deny, didn't defend, just retreated into the same silence he had forced on her for a decade. Her younger brother Marshall, once a rising star in the gubernatorial race, held a shaky press conference. He thanked the community and announced the suspension of his campaign, citing respect for the investigation and the need for family healing. It was a well-written statement, but Mira never watched it. She didn't need to. The same night the press circled his house, she was sitting at a plain desk in her small apartment writing longhand on stationery that smelled faintly of smoke and eucalyptus. She wasn't writing for the cameras. She was writing for her people. Each letter bore a name she hadn't spoken in years, Morales Jensen Reyes Callahan. Each name pulled from the roster of the squad that followed her into hell and back only to watch her erased from every record. She wrote without flourish. No speeches, no apologies, just a single page each. Straight, direct, as only she could. They said we should forget. I never did. I remember every shift, every face, every scream. I remember the count and how it could have been higher if we hadn't held. We did what was right. I stood up now, not for me, but for you, so no one would ever think silence means guilt or shame or weakness. We survived that night because we chose each other. That's something they'll never understand. Some letters were mailed, others left at the front desk of stations she could no longer walk into without drawing a crowd. One she hand-delivered Jensen, now wheelchair-bound from a later fire. He read it without looking up, tears sliding silently into his chest. None of them posted about it online, and neither did she. That was never the point. When a journalist from Channel 8 called Mira, declined the interview. When CNN emailed, she deleted it. When a major publisher offered to ghostwrite her memoir, she didn't even respond. She did one thing and one thing only: she mailed one more letter, this time to herself. It sat in her mailbox for 3 days before she opened it. Inside, written in her own hand, "We don't need a stage, we need justice." She tucked the letter away inside the folio with McCrae's original signature, then slid the folio back into the drawer right beside the photo of her unit before the fire, before the fallout, before silence tried to bury her. Outside, the world roared with opinion. Inside, Mira Lennox finally exhaled. Not because the fire was over, but because at last it had light. She didn't knock, didn't announce her return. Mira simply pushed the gate with her fingertips and walked in like the ghost of herself from 10 years ago. The grass in the front yard had grown wild, curling against the fence like it too had given up waiting. No cars in the driveway, no movement behind the curtains. She didn't come to see anyone. She came to leave something behind. Inside her palm was a bouquet of white fire lilies, flowers that only bloomed in scorched earth. The ones her mother always said were proof that even fire has grace. The house was locked as expected, so Mira didn't go in. She walked to the backyard, to the old tool shed that had become a makeshift altar after her mother's stroke. And there, hanging slightly crooked against the wood panel, was her mother's framed photo, smiling faintly as if mid-sigh. Mira kneeled. Her knees touched damp earth, her fingertips trembled, but her face stayed steady. "I did it, Ma," she whispered. "I didn't scream. I didn't burn anyone back. I just told the truth." She laid the bouquet down beneath the photograph and stood. She turned to leave, but froze. Footsteps. Then a voice rusted old but unmistakable. "I didn't know you were here." She turned. Her father stood at the edge of the path. Not dressed for confrontation, no belt, no jacket, no stance of authority. He looked smaller. The cane he leaned on wasn't theatrical. It was survival. They didn't speak for a moment. "Then I saw the papers." Mira didn't nod. He stepped forward. Not close, just enough that the silence began to shift. "You shamed the family." She tilted her head. "Or maybe I just didn't kneel." He looked away. "You think standing makes you stronger?" "No," she said. "I think standing makes me honest." He breathed deep and ragged. Then from his jacket he pulled something. A photograph. Faded, creased. It was their unit, Station 42. Mira in the center, arms around 2 firefighters who didn't make it out that night. McCrae behind her, hand resting on her shoulder like a general over his most stubborn soldier. Her father held it like it had weight, like it burned. "I kept it," he said, "even when your brother told me to throw it out." Mira didn't take the photo. Instead, she reached into her pocket and pulled out another. The same shot. But this one framed, undamaged, a silent mirror. She handed it to him. Their fingers brushed. He looked at her, not as a father trying to make sense of a defiant child, but as a man looking at another survivor. There were no apologies, none needed. In some families, forgiveness was not spoken. It was simply accepted. He nodded once and walked away. Mira didn't stop him. She stood there until the wind dried the last dew from the grass, then left the old house without ever crossing the threshold. Later that day, she drove north. Back to Wildcrest Ridge. Only this time the air didn't sting with smoke. The trees had returned young, thinner than before, but full of color. The park was quiet. A group of school children toured the edge with a ranger. Mira waited until they passed, then walked alone toward the memorial. It stood beneath a cedar cast in bronze, small, almost humble, a plaque. She knelt to read it. In honor of Captain Mira Lennox, who didn't leave anyone behind, who burned but didn't break. There were flowers laid beneath it, not from her. A child had left a toy fire truck. Someone had carved a heart into the bark nearby, and above the plaque, etched deeper into the metal, was a quote from McCrae himself. When others chose silence, she chose the fire. Mira didn't cry, but her hands found the warmth of the plaque and stayed there. Long enough to feel the sun through metal, long enough to know she wasn't forgotten, not by the ground, not by the wind, not by the people who still whispered her name with reverence. She stayed there for an hour, then stood. No fanfare, no camera crews, no redemption arcs. Just a woman who told the truth. And the world at last listening in silence. The room was small, barely enough space for the fold-out chairs, the CPR mannequins, and the smell of antiseptic lingering like an old habit. Mira moved through it like she had a purpose, not loud, not decorated in glory, just steady. The way someone walks when they know they've already been through worse fires than any classroom could hold. It wasn't a fancy place, no banners, no funding. Just a hand-painted sign out front, Emergency Response Basics. Mondays and Thursdays. The kind of class that 10 years ago she would have scoffed at. But now it was everything. 10 minutes before the hour, she adjusted the oxygen regulator on the practice tank, then turned toward the door. Her students would arrive soon. Most were young working second jobs, a few retirees, one mother who brought her teenage son because he was addicted to rescue shows. And then just before the bell rang, the door creaked open and she saw her. Thin frame, hair tucked behind one ear, school bag hanging off one shoulder. A girl no older than 15 standing still as if unsure if she had the right place. Mira took one step forward. The girl's eyes flicked to hers, then quickly down again. "You're early," Mira said gently. The girl nodded. "I didn't want to be late." Mira motioned her in. No pressure, just space. As the other students filtered in, Mira handed out gloves, showed them where the medical kits were. The usual routine. But her eyes returned to the girl, always on the periphery, always watching. Not taking notes, just breathing. The lesson began. Basic wound care, pulse checks. The rhythm of CPR taught to the beat of a metronome set low and steady, like a heartbeat under control. Mira's voice didn't rise. She let silence shape the room. Let gravity speak for her. Halfway through, they moved to fire response drills. "How many of you have seen a fire extinguisher before?" she asked. Hands went up. "How many of you have held one?" Fewer hands. Mira walked over to the steel canister, picked it up, then turned to the girl. "Come here." The girl hesitated. "I've never—" "That's why you're here." Slowly, the girl stepped forward. Mira handed the canister to her. Her hands trembled, but she gripped it. Mira stood beside her, not touching, just steadying. "Now imagine it's real," Mira said. "Smoke, screams, everything inside you tells you to run. But your hands, they stay." The girl blinked. "My dad, he died in the Ridge fire." Mira didn't flinch. "I know," she said quietly. The girl's voice broke. "He went back in to help someone. He didn't come back out." Mira nodded. Then he stood. The girl looked at her. He stood when it mattered. "And now you're here. That's not an accident." The girl stared at the extinguisher in her hands, then at the mannequin. "Can I try?" "Go ahead." She moved with hesitation at first, then muscle memory began to build. Mira watched, arms crossed, but eyes soft. She'd trained soldiers, firefighters, politicians, but nothing ever felt heavier or more sacred than this single moment. After class, while others left and the sun sank low enough to bathe the linoleum floor in a wash of gold, the girl lingered. "Do you think someone like me could ever do what you did?" Mira smiled, not the proud smile of an instructor, but the gentle, forgiving smile of someone who had once asked the same question of her own mentor. "You already are," she said. "You walked through that door." The girl looked at the floor, then at her hands. "Thank you." Mira walked over to the window, pulling it open slightly. The breeze rolled in warm, familiar, almost like breath. Outside, the old training yard was still half charred from where the volunteers ran drills over ashes. A patch of grass had begun to regrow near the west fence, and through the shifting light of early evening, a beam of sun reflected off a rusted hydrant, casting the silhouette of a man in uniform. McCrae, of course not, but maybe. Maybe. Mira didn't turn back to see if the girl was still watching her. She knew she was. And she knew as sure as the sun rises after the burn that someone else would walk through that door next week. Another name, another wound, another ember trying not to fade. The past had tried to erase her, but now she was writing futures, not with fire, but with light. Mira sat by the window of her modest cabin pen, gliding slowly across thick paper that had aged with time just like her. But this letter wasn't for the past. It wasn't an apology or a justification or even a plea for understanding. It was a beacon, a fire line in ink, a lifeline thrown forward to hands she'd never shake young firefighters not yet burned by the politics of silence. The header read simply, "To the ones who will come after." Her handwriting, steady as ever, carried the final words of a soldier turned exile, then witness, then finally, flamekeeper. "If silence is the wound," she wrote, "then truth is the antibiotic. There is nothing noble about covering pain with medals. Real honor is earned when no one's watching, when your hands shake, when the smoke blinds you, and you choose to go forward anyway." She sealed the envelope with a wax stamp bearing her old insignia. Not for drama, just memory. She slid it into a plain folder labeled "Pass it on when I'm gone." The photo album lay open beside her, the pages soft with age. Near the middle, not at the front where the heroic were often framed, was a photo of her and her brother. A rare moment, both of them still teenagers, before ambition hardened him and principle hardened her. In the photo, she was holding up his first scout badge with both hands while he wore a crooked grin. She paused for a moment before sliding the photo back into its sleeve. It didn't belong at the beginning, but it still belonged. The next morning, the town held its annual remembrance. Flags waved half-mast, and the same podium was dusted off, polished, and lit with artificial solemnity. But this year, the speaker wasn't a governor or a senator or anyone with a campaign fund. It was Dylan Shaw, a man whose lungs had nearly collapsed under the Black Hollow blaze. The man Mira had pulled from a backdraft with her own oxygen mask. He stepped up to the microphone, voice low, coat still bearing the same patches from a decade ago. No written speech, just memory. "She saved me," he said. And then they tried to erase her for it. But some fires don't die when you smother them, they move underground. He held up a charred glove, his own rescued from the wreckage and kept all these years. This isn't a relic. It's a reminder of who stood their ground, of who paid the price for telling the truth. Applause didn't erupt. It unfolded, like people finally realizing their hands could speak too. Mira wasn't there. She wasn't watching from the back or hiding behind a tree. She had no need for confirmation anymore. She was elsewhere, atop a ridge somewhere just past Glenmore's county line, where the earth still smelled faintly of ash and pine needles. She wore old hiking boots and a sun-bleached ball cap. No medals, no uniform. Just a thermos of coffee gone cold and a dog-eared map from her first training rotation. She didn't climb for the view. She climbed because it reminded her how to breathe. The wind cut sharp at the top, pushing her hair back, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she sat down on a jagged boulder, set her thermos beside her, and stared into the valley below, where young trees had started sprouting green teeth breaking through soot. Her watch beeped softly. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the old voice recorder. It still worked, though the buttons had faded. She pressed play, and there it was. That voice. Gravel thick and steady as a diesel engine, Commander McCrae. This is Unit Lead McCrae. May 9th, 0200 hours. Lennox is holding the line at Sector E. Told her to fall back. She didn't. She said, "I'm not the kind that leaves my team. God damn it, she's fireproof in all the ways that matter." He paused on the recording, then the last line. "She doesn't need to be led. She is the one holding the torch." Mira didn't cry. She didn't smile either. She just closed her eyes and let the wind carry the words away. Down the mountain, into the trees, through the town, and maybe if the wind was stubborn enough, into some future locker room where a young recruit would be told her name and understand what it meant to hold a line. Fade out.